biggest problem right now is just the lack of heat and need things to start to warm up.
Hi, once again, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlin Bohling. I want to welcome aboard the president of Comstock Investments, Mr. Matthew Kruse. And we're going to take a look at our market situation here on a Tuesday. All right, all kinds of pressure on the feed grain markets here. The corn market just cannot seem to really find much of a friend here over the past week or so. Matthew, what's going on?
Well, we're trading the weather right now, and so far the weather's been, pretty favorable in most places. And I know that people in Ohio maybe don't want to hear that. I know there's always places you can find that are challenging. You have your haves and your haves not, but the market is just going to gauge things as a whole. And I just don't know that what's happened in Ohio is big enough to have an impact. And I've lived through that. Just last year, our farm were dead center, ground zero for all that flooding. And in my opinion, I think is even bigger area than what's going on in Ohio this year. And the market just shrugged it off, didn't even react to what happened last year. So I know it's frustrating when it happens. You look for some sort of a reaction, but the market's seen this before. It's, too many times does it cry wolf. And so it's going to need more validation, I guess, from the Eastern Corn Belt. And so obviously there's some areas there you can see in the planning progress maps that Ohio, different places are behind schedule, but there are a lot of other places that got planted ahead of schedule. The bigger states. And so that's why it's just going to ignore what's happened in some of those areas. And so pulled up here, this is kind of the precipitation forecast for the week, at least going out to the 15th of June. And there's a dry corridor that you can kind of see there that isn't going to get too much. I would point out that those areas got quite a bit of rain last week, so I think they're probably sitting pretty good. I don't think that's alarming by any means, but they do go through some important areas there in northern Missouri and kind of that central Illinois and northern Indiana region that are pretty big producers. But still, you see a lot of rain in the northern half in Iowa and southern Minnesota. And at least in Iowa, that's where the bulk of the corn produced, kind of the northern tier there of Iowa. And so, this whole south and kind of southeast region of the United States continues to get a lot of rainfall. And so, at least in the north term, I think the market's just going to look at this as rain makes grain, and we're going to keep getting bigger. So
last week I ventured through to Texas, went down to Dallas for a few days, and on the way I went through Arkansas, and it was amazing to me how many fields of corn in Arkansas were fully pollinated already. Corn all tasseled out and everything. It's kind of like a little bit different world when you go that far south like that. And I know I had seen tornado chaser video from Mississippi. It's all the same there too. Corn looked pretty good. But if that's the case, looking at your map that you have here, 2 inches of rain in Arkansas, I mean, that corn's not going to be under any drought stress whatsoever as it fills.
No. And you can see most of the rain was right there in central Texas and in parts of Oklahoma. I know Oklahoma has had like twice of what their annual rainfall has been up until this point. And so, but yeah, central Texas there is going to get deluge here this week with rainfall. So I was out at our family farm late last week on, Friday, and everything was it was so wet I couldn't walk out in the fields, or I was going to, track in half the topsoil back in the pickup. And so, everything looked very good. And, the one particular farm I took some footage of, that's been in the family now for 129 years, 129th crop. It's still very early, but everything looked excellent, to be honest, and for this time of the year. Knock on wood, because it's usually about the time something changes and you get some sort of extreme weather event. But the word I would use to describe it is it was very consistent. One of the most evenly germinated crops that I've seen in quite a while, where a plant on one side of the field is of equal size, height, development as a plant on the other side of the field. So everything, planting conditions were optimal. Everything just came up evenly. And so it looks very good, but obviously we have a long ways to go. You brought up the pollination in the South, and I think that what I was reading, we're kind of targeting July 15th is kind of the midway point for roughly half of the Corn Belt reaches 50% pollination by July 15th, and I think in our area we'll probably beat that by maybe a couple weeks just because we plan a little bit earlier. But the grain belt as a whole, we're looking at July 15th to reach that 50% pollination, and so it's well within the average, I think. And so, no, we're just not seeing any weather issues right now.
About the only thing really left that could really light a fire under the market would be maybe if it would turn off to be like 100 degrees during pollination time or something.
Correct.
That would maybe ruin the pollination a little bit. But boy, you
Yeah.
hate to hang your hat on that,
Yeah, you hate to hang a hat on that, and that's why we hedge, because we don't know. We don't know what the weather's going to do. And I talked to Eric Snodgrass last week, and he says this stuff can all change real quickly. He thought there's still chance of drought developing, but back when we talked with him at the Climate Classic in March, he thought we would already seen more of that by now, and it hasn't materialized. And so it hasn't quite. We've shifted more to a neutral, La Nina, I guess, and so we're not seeing the drought kick in, but there's still, looking out longer term, you do see it still lingering drought in the Western Corn Belt.
Well, let's look into next week then, if that's the case. What do you see on the map here? This is
But
anomaly of moisture. Is that right for next week?
yeah, it's just showing us, getting out closer to later June as a whole. I mean, doesn't this look like, rainfall is pretty widespread and above average to above average in most areas. And so it may be up into the North Dakota there, northern Minnesota, it leans a little drier, but it sure looks like 90% or more of the grain belt here through June looks pretty darn good in terms of getting adequate moisture.
Now, that would be conducive maybe to wheat harvest in Oklahoma and Southwest Texas, but it looks like problems for early wheat harvest in Texas. I mean, my goodness, they're going to have a heck of a hard time in the central part of the state there.
Yeah. If they're getting 5 inches of rain, I would think that would cause some issues.
The only thing is, it's not that big of a wheat producing area right there. Let's go a little further out. Okay, let's take a look at July 24th here. What are you looking at?
And this is what Snodgrass was talking about, that he still believes there's still a decent chance of drought forming in the Western Corn Belt, but he's kind of pulled that back, where I think he was at 60% chance, and now he's slightly below 50% chance. But looking at the weather anomaly, it does kind of show a drying effect in the Western Corn Belt, and especially in the Nebraska, Kansas region. But it gets on into Iowa and Missouri as well. But it gets back above normal over in the Eastern Corn Belt. So there, obviously, July and August are much more critical weather months than June, and so just as it gets hotter and evaporation rates increase, and the crop is going to consume more water as time goes on, and so anything can happen yet. But if you had to look at, based off today, we're recording this June 10th. You look at right now, there's just not enough weather threats out there to want to turn this market around.
Now, in Nebraska, there, a lot of the bears would argue, well, that's right where the irrigation belt is. Maybe not so much in Kansas. It might be along the border there, but they'll probably discount any weather premium on account of that.
Yeah, and I was told those pivots and those irrigation systems were running full bore, last month, just to get the crop germinated because it was so dry. And so they have the irrigation to fall back on, and I think it looks like they might need it here in the month of July. Probably not using it so much right now in June, but the next month we're going to have to turn it back on again.
All right, now this is a little different type of map. Explain what we're looking at here on this.
Well, just the percent of normal for rainfall up until through June 8th for the season. And I was kind of surprised, like there's a lot of pockets that are a little below average, that you look in Northwest Iowa, it says 75. So that means it's gotten 75% of its um, average rainfall up until now. And boy, you go there and everything looks pretty darn wet. And I would have thought we would have been a lot closer to the average. And so maybe we don't need the average. Maybe the average was too much rainfall, but you could kind of see those reddish hues in different areas. And it's really once you get over into, we're talking about all this rain in Ohio, and especially you get down into the southern part of Ohio, it's at 100 and what is it, 131%. So it's really 31% above what the average is there. And so that, I don't know, I was expecting a little bit more, I guess. As you move down further into Tennessee there, I kind of circled that it's quite a bit more than normal. You look over into down, I don't know if you can see down in Oklahoma, that's where it's 200%. They got twice as much rain than they normally get. And so you can certainly see where the rain has been going. It's kind of confirms what you would have guessed, but with all the flooding talk going on, I would expect it would have been even more than that, I guess, in Ohio, and wouldn't expect it to have been as low as what it is in some of those other places in Illinois and Iowa.
So I guess that kind of explains why the markets are doing what they're doing these days. Just not a lot of reason to put any panic in the market.
No, that's why it's kind of given up. The weather premium is getting smaller as time goes on so far.
All right, Matthew, you have another graphic here, and it has to do with the movement of grain around the U.S. And, I'm amazed at how much this has changed. According to this chart, from 2010 to what we had last year, that's a bigger shift than I expected to see.
Well, yeah, there's obviously with Brazil's corn harvest and their main second crop corn harvest ratcheting up now. There's a lot of talk about their infrastructure capabilities, and it's kind of interesting to see how it's shifted here. They continue to rely more on highway system. It's at 47% in 2024. So this shows their mode of transportation for grain and corn, for soybeans and corn, to ports. And it shows how they got their grain to the ports. And so obviously they went from 39% to 47% from 2010 till now, basically. So almost half of their grain is still being trucked to the ports, and they have managed to increase some of what they're shipping out through rivers, which I think a lot of that is some of those tributaries in the Amazon to get it out of there. But their reliance on railroad has decreased, and that's really probably their Achilles heel. Is be nice if, and it's one of our great advantages that so much of ours is still railroaded across the country and makes a big difference. And so I just thought it was kind of interesting to see how their mode of transportation has shifted and changed in the last 14 years, basically.
So just to be clear, this is the modes of transportation in Brazil and how they get their crops to port.
Yeah,
This
correct.
is not the U.S. This is Brazil.
Correct.
I want to take a look at this. Now, this is something that you have come up with for a graphic here. And a lot of folks might need you to explain or maybe interpret what we're looking at on this graphic. What is this?
Well, obviously Brazil's in their harvest season for their second crop of corn, and it always seems to come up this year when they get through their harvest and they have a big challenge of getting their crop into storage, and discussion around how this crop is getting out of the country. And there's kind of been a shift where in the past where Santos in Sao Paulo has been the largest port, and so this is showing the I think the combined soybean and corn exports and where they're going out through each port, and it's kind of showing how important the northern ports are. That Arco Norte, that is the northern arc ports, a combination of probably half a dozen smaller ports in the Amazon and kind of on the northern tier of Brazil, where there are exports taking place, where 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it was almost non-existent. And so now it's basically showing that, for 2024 anyway, 38% of the corn and beans were exported out of those northern ports into that Amazon basin region for the most part. There are a couple northern ports that fall outside of those Amazon basin region, but most of them is in that. And so just kind of show you that how much that's increased over time. and the crop every year, from 2020 to 2024 has been increasing as well. And so, some of those southern ports have started to drop a little bit, not a lot, but it just kind of shows how most of the crop is being exported out of Brazil. And it's somewhat of a recent development, in the last decade or so, where you're seeing most of that crop shift north out of those ports.
Well, what are you hearing from your contacts in South America about how the remainder of the harvest is progressing here? Of course, I guess the last one to finish up is going to be in Argentina, right?
Yeah, it's Argentina seems like it takes several months to harvest their crop just because they plant it over such a long period of time. But I don't think you're going to see any yield surprises there. The market is looking; they're expecting a much larger crop in Brazil, for at least from the private forecast. Now, USDA has slowly been increasing their estimates in Brazil, but the private estimates seem to be outpacing those of the USDA, and so that's what we're looking for, more confirmation. And it's still early, like they have less than 5% of Brazil's second crop corn harvested. It started out kind of slow here, a little slower than I expected, but it's going to start to pick up here starting now, basically, as the fields dry out. But I've seen some reports of what would be the equivalent of 180 bushels per acre, which is outstanding. It's like twice of what the national average is. To just put it into perspective, the last CONAB report, they were targeting like 93 bushels per acre for the average of the second corn crop. And so it's much less than obviously our national average that we're targeting, 181 bushels per acre. And so for them to be able to get certain fields to reach that 180 bushels per acre is a big deal. Typically, but they start out with the best yields because that's what was planted first and had the most rainfall and never lacked for any rain. You're going to see kind of a tapering effect that as the harvest progresses, the yields are going to drop. And so really you can't, judge it by the whole crop until you get to the very end, obviously. As fields run out of rain that were planted into, early March, and just haven't had enough time. But it's a good sign though for them, for their crop. It's a sign that the crop is solid. And last year some of the initial fields probably yielded 140, and now they're yielding 180. So what's that tell you? That the crop is there. It's going to be good. It's just a question of how good is it going to be. A lot of that, I think obviously the rainfall for the most part of the season was solid, but I think that they've been using more fungicide applications and maybe increasing some of their nitrogen use as well. And so I think that's been part of it as well. That's helped a lot.
I want to bring this back home here to the Midwest for a little bit. You mentioned earlier that you had a chance to go out into the field and you were talking about how wet it is. I was thinking you had a chance to maybe take a little bit of video out on your farm. Would you care if we took a peek at your farm here?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So what are we going to be looking at here? You have a couple short video clips.
Well, just two main fields. One, I climbed up on the grain bin, so you kind of get a little bit more of an aerial view, best I could. And not a lot going on the farmstead, but it's actually where my dad grew up, on that one farm where I'm on the grain bin site. And you kind of see, mostly look for any planting mistakes, any pockets, anything like that. But everything looks pretty even, and I was really pleased with it. The other field I just kind of drove by, it just kind of give you another idea just how healthy and green and even everything looks. I think we got lots of rain here late last week, and we're scheduled for more rain this week, and I think people's biggest problem right now is just the lack of heat, and we need things to start to warm up. I know here today and tomorrow we're supposed to be in the 80s, but it seems like we still spend a lot of time back in the 70s again later this week, and so that's really what we're looking for. Is had we not planted this crop so early, you could almost argue that we might be losing a little bit of yield just from the lack of heat. It's just crop's not going to develop as quick. But, considering that we got this crop in on time so quickly, I think that probably offsets that. I think eventually it's going to heat up. It's going to take a little bit longer. It might not be till later this month.
Now, on these video clips from your farm, how does that compare, if you can think back, to what they looked like a year ago at this time? Explain what they looked like back then.
Well, it's depending on the field. Some of them didn't have anything. They, took pre-event plant. It was pretty disappointing. I don't know the exact date, but I would say it was early June until maybe they actually finished. And so you look at it now, you got corn that's almost knee high versus just getting planted here in the first part of June last year. And so, yeah, it's a night and day difference. The whole, um, time will tell yet, but we're off to a really great start. Even I talked to my ag lender last week, and he even joked like, boy, there might be some people that get 300 bushel per acre yields in not maybe as a whole, but in some fields. And it's too early yet, but if things continue in this way, there might be somebody that gets that. I don't know that it's not going to happen as a whole, but on farm average, but everything is really starting out that way. So yeah, I don't know. It's usually around the time something happens and drought perks up, or we get some hail or something. So I don't know, kind of knock on wood, but it's off to a great start in our area. And I drove through. I didn't drive everywhere. I drove through central Iowa, large parts of western Iowa on Highway 20, and boy, it was a lot of the same. There really wasn't a bad area. I mean, everything just looks really even, and is off to a great start.
That's really good to hear. I'm glad to hear that everybody may have a pretty good growing season out there. Do you know of any prevent plant acres anywhere in your part of the Corn Belt?
Not really. Not in our immediate area. No. I'm sure there might be something in there in Ohio. I haven't heard much from North Dakota either. It's usually a place that seems like just because their window for planting is a little bit shorter, that they might have a little bit. But I think everything's, they've had enough time to get it in. I just think I'm sure there's portions of the Eastern Corn Belt that have maybe gotten flooded. I think there's some areas in the Delta that we talked about that got flooded out and got too much rain and probably affected some of the cotton. And so they might have taken some prevent plant, some things. But those are the two main areas, that eastern region of the Corn Belt and southern Ohio, and then some areas in the Delta that have probably had to take a little bit more prevent plant than what they're used to.
But for the Western Corn Belt, things look pretty good. And if that's the case, I guess what worries me is, you can have too much of a good thing, Matthew. Is that changing the company's overall marketing outlook now? I mean, are you having to shift things around a little bit, maybe lower your price targets, or what are you looking at right now?
I don't know that I'm lowering my price target, but we've been adding some protection on. And so, for our subscribers that follow our report, we're concerned, and we felt that we've gotten to the point where now half of our crop is new crop is covered. And and seeing what happened yesterday, where things collapsed on us, it just kind of shows that where we're at. I think the managed money has been increasing their net shorts, and as long as we keep moving lower, they're going to add to that. And so that's unfortunately where we're at. Like I said, a lot of things can change, and maybe a month from now we'll be jumping out of those put options. But I gotta make a decision based off what we see today. We don't have a crystal ball, and so it's important to protect our downside. And a lot of people seem to have the impression that know what the market's going to do, that it's not going to go any lower than this, because we're sitting kind of at the bottom of a resistance here in D's corn at 435 right now. But I disagree. The market's going to do what it wants to do, and if we keep getting favorable weather going forward, there's nothing to say that it can't continue to move lower. And so we have discussed price targets in on the bottom end at below $4. I can't rule that out today. If the weather is favorable, it's certainly possible that we go below $4 in the new crop. Now, if we do that, I don't know that we'll spend a lot of time below that levels, but I still think it's possible. But that's why we hedge. We don't know what the weather's going to do. We don't have a crystal ball. I know some people complain about the cost of putting on hedges, but I did it myself on my own account. That's on my own farm, and some of those hedges were 16 cents each, per contract. The market dropped 13 cents yesterday. So yeah, it's expensive, but the market, when it can move, and so I just covered most of that drop yesterday in that one move in one day, and so I think it might get a little bit of bounce, but I don't know. I'm not trying to be a negative Nelly, but typically when you have large crops, it's going to weigh on the markets, and I don't think this is something we can export our way out of, especially considering what's going on with the tariffs, and I think any real solid tariff announcement is probably months away. And so, yeah, I just think we have a lot of downside risk yet going forward.
It's hard to take emotion out of it. One of the most dangerous things I think I've ever heard in my around 30 years of doing this is when I hear people say, oh, the market can't go any lower, or the market can't go any higher. And the market has this uncanny ability to say, hold my beer. And it'll prove you
Famous
wrong.
last words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess, keep all options open out there, and don't get stuck with the emotional side of it. Look at things from a realistic point of view, I guess. Anyway, Matthew, good information. I appreciate you sharing your information. Thanks for giving us a look at your own farm operation. It's nice to see things doing good. Look forward to checking with you again here real soon. Matthew Kruse is the president of Comstock Investments, and we thank you for joining us. Appreciate that so much. For producer Brianne Jenkins, I'm Marlin Bohling. We'll catch you next time here on the Comstock channel.
Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and/or options is substantial, and each investor and/or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.